Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Sagan and 60. I was at the Mississauga Symphony last week and ran into a gentleman that I have an incredible amount of respect for. Pieter Kool is his name. He's been involved in Mississauga stuff for far longer than I've lived here, and I've lived here for 24 years, so he's been around for a while. And he said, Brian, we got some big issues, and I got to introduce you to Axel Breuer, who is one of his associates who's aware of some of the big issues that we've got going on in Mississauga today. So it's a real pleasure for me to introduce you tonight to Axel Breuer and Pieter Kool. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Axel Breuer, you've been a resident, I understand, here for twice as long as me, 45 years. And you're going to discuss tonight your efforts, both with the Mississauga Residents Association, Marionette, and your own ratepayers group as some of the reason for today's interview. Is that correct?
Yeah, as by way of introduction, before we start, I'd like you to do something. You're a numbers guy.
Yep.
Please take out your calculator and divide 3% by 0.36.
Okay.
The 0.36 is Mississauga's share of your total tax bill. What did you get? You should have got 8.3%. Did you know that the 8.3% is the actual tax increase imposed by Mississauga for 2023? Not much lower than Toronto's 9.5.
No, they said it was only a 3% tax increase. That's what they said in the press release. That's what they said in all their speeches. 3% tax increase.
And that's the point. Let's try the others. The 2024 divide 2.3% by 0.36 again. That's 6.4%. And that's the true tax increase for 2024. What is significant about the 2024 tax increase is that the city's press release described it as modest. I don't think that the real number of 6.4% is modest. You see that instead of divulging the true tax increase, the city opts to announce only the percentage impact on the total tax bill, which includes the city, education, and the Peel region.
But it should be how much their taxes increase. And what you're saying is their tax increases are actually going up by 6.4% and 8.3%, not by the 2 and 3% that they're actually publicizing?
Correct. That's how they publicize it. And their argument is, well, we also publicize it in the budget documents. Well, the budget documents are 800 pages long, and I don't know how many residents are going to sit down and want to read it.
You're kidding. That's crazy. So you're saying our taxes didn't go up by 3%, they went up by 6.4%.
Our taxes for 2024 went up by 6.4%, and in 2023, it went up 8.3%.
With all due respect, that's misleading.
Thank you. And that is the major point that our group has been trying to deal with. The whole budget process is not transparent. And in fact, what we're coming up to is our case that in one instance, and a major instance, it's actually they're publishing false numbers.
I think you're right in that regard. The mayoralty election is on right now.
Yes.
The city of Mississauga is $1 billion corporation in expenditures with almost 5,000 employees.
Yes.
Would you hire a career politician to run a 5,000 person $1 billion company?
No. And that's another aspect of it. With the exception of perhaps one person, with all due respect to their backgrounds and education, none of them appear to have any financial training. So when they sit on committees like the audit committee or budget committee, I don't think they have an understanding of what is actually happening. But that's no defense, because in this case, when we see what has been happening, they know what's happening.
Now, you've got a business background. Tell me a little bit, sir, about your background and why you got interested in this.
Well, initially, I was a member of the Marionette, it's Mississauga Ratepayers Association Net. I was appointed there by my ratepayer group because this Marionette its goal is to represent all the ratepayer associations with the city, primarily with the city. And one of its functions, since I'm a CPA CA, I also have an MBA. I was put on the budget committee, and I was asked to take a look at the city's budgeting process. And that's how I came to discover all of these oddities. There are many, many more, but I'm focusing on the largest one is the misrepresentation of financial information.
So if you know most companies were increasing their expense structure by 6 and 8% in today's marketplace, they wouldn't be surviving. They wouldn't be sustainable.
Absolutely not. And this is a criticism that you do hear about Mississauga, that their tax increases have been excessive. And to make it worse, the city, except during COVID, consistently posts large surpluses. Now, surpluses tell you that the budget was inflated. So I can't understand how this is sustainable.
I met an individual just the other day who was telling me about a construction project going on in Mississauga. He said that the intention was to renovate and rebuild something because it was quote unquote end of life, and so therefore they had a budget of $19 million to fix it up. And he said they
Yes.
went through that and they found that a whole bunch of the things weren't close to end of life, and a private company would get another 5 or 10 years out of the asset before they fixed the floors, the rubber, some of the things. Maybe the roof needed to get fixed, but the other things didn't. And that when they actually found some savings, the guidance back was, you better spend the money. Let's find some places to spend the money because we got the budget allocation and we need to spend the budget.
That's right. And yes, that is so typical in many governmental organizations.
What's the problem here? You know, when you think about a private company, if you had a chance to cut spending and increase your profits, you would do that for sure. But it
That's
seems
right.
like in government, you got no incentive to cut spending. Your only incentive is
No,
to increase your budget. So you've got a bigger
no.
budget dollar figure to manage.
And on top of it, the process itself, they always do the current year's budget based on last year's budget and not on what they actually spent. So when they have surpluses, they spent less than the budget. So that when I said 8.3%, the real tax increase is much higher. Yet again, when they do get the funding, they do want to go and spend the
No,
money.
no. Are you telling me that the numbers that they report are budget this year versus budget last year, not
That
budget
is
this
correct.
year versus actual last year?
That is correct.
Oh my God,
And
that's
that's many municipalities do that, but it's in my opinion totally misleading because I have evidence on several departments where they spent substantially less than in the previous year, yet their budget was based on the previous year's budget. So the real increase over what was actually spent is significantly higher.
where does the reserve go? It just goes into a slush fund?
Goes into the bank accounts. And it's yes, they do have to have reserves, and they do use that, say, to pay off debt. Our issue is be open and honest about what you're doing, and that's clearly not happening with the evidence that we have.
I understand that you took a really close look into the fire department. Tell me about
Yes,
some of your findings there.
yeah. First of all, I want to say that my comments are not directed at the dedicated firefighters. This is
Understood.
about the management of budgets. And what has happened is that the uh, the when we looked at the data, which we got on the Freedom of Information Act, the budget for the city's fire department is based on the number of emergencies it has to handle and the time it takes to get to the emergency. And what we discovered is that the numbers that they were publishing were false. give you an example. They were overstated by an average of 31%, which means roughly, say, in 1 year, they posted 30,000 calls, and when indeed they were 22,000. What they put in was duplicate addresses, public relations campaigns, charity drives. Those aren't emergencies, yet they used those significantly inflated numbers every year to get their funding.
And then on response time?
Response time, well, when we did our own calculations of response time, because they refused to show us their calculations, we discovered that the response time was much closer to the standard that the NFPA, North American Fire Prevention Association, is the standard setter for all of North America. And we discovered that there was in 1 year only a 10-second gap between the standard and what they were doing, as opposed to a substantially larger number. When we brought this up to the chief and to the finance staff, we were ignored. In fact, when we asked them to confirm or refute it, they haven't. In fact, they have not refuted anything that we have done.
And did you raise this with council as well?
Yeah, we had a deputation on February 8th, 2023, where we laid this at council's feet, and it thanked us, adopted the deputation, and ignored us. And then
you found that the fire department, and I'm not saying you're accurate because I'd love to look at your numbers to assess them if I could, but you're saying that there were actually 22,000 calls and they published it at 30,000 calls. And you're saying that they were saying the response time was therefore far slower, but they were only 10 seconds off of the standard response time. You reported these numbers and no one did anything about it.
Well, that is why we're here today. We don't know.
Council should have been going crazy over this.
That's
is there not like an audit committee you can go to, or an ombudsman, or an information person, or something like that?
We went to the audit committee, and we said, you have a very serious internal control issue. Well, what did the audit committee do? I'll tell you. The CFO
called an investigation. Brought the police chief and the fire chief on the carpet.
That's what should have happened. The CFO stated that because we filed a whistleblower report. Now, we have this on video. We filed a whistleblower report, and that since only employees may do so, she didn't have to consider it. In her opinion, what we did constituted a complaint, which she also didn't have to consider. In short, neither the CFO nor the internal auditor they actually refused to look at our information. Refused.
Sorry, this is the CFO of the police department, the fire department, or of the city?
No, the CFO of the city.
The CFO of the city was confronted by a 30% inflated number and didn't want to look at it.
That is right. That is right. And this is the type of what you call pushback that we have been getting for over 5 years.
We're going to take a break for some messages and be back with Axel Breuer and Pieter Kool in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everyone. This is a conversation that we need to have here in Mississauga. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2. Welcome back, everyone, to the Breuer and Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. If you're listening tonight, this is a really important conversation about budgets in Mississauga, but I think it's applicable probably to budgets in city governments, far wider. I don't know that for a fact, but I'm worried that that's the reality. My guests are Axel Breuer and Pieter Kool, both long-term residents of Mississauga, and Alex I've just met, but Pieter I am well familiar with, people that have been involved in our community for a long period of time. The first thing that we talked about was the way that the city of Mississauga publishes its tax increase. And what it does, it would appear, according to Axel, is it takes its amount of tax increase, and rather than saying what that tax increase is over last year's Mississauga taxes, it takes that tax increase and divides it by the Mississauga and Peel tax increase, and therefore underrepresents dramatically the tax increase. And what he says, in 2003, the tax increase, rather than being 3%, was actually over 8%. And in 2004, rather than a 3% tax increase, the increase was actually about 7%. And so a fairly dramatic difference in the representation of the tax increase. The second thing he said is that they do the tax increase in the budget over the prior year's budget rather than the prior year's actuals, which means that if you actually underspent your budget last year, then the tax increase this year really, from an expenditure standpoint, dramatically overrepresents what the increase would be over what you actually spent and you actually need in the prior year, over the prior year. And so I think that they're, again, underinflating the increase, underrepresenting the increase, and making it easier for them to grab more money. And then what he's saying is he's delved into the fire department and found that, and I haven't assessed these numbers, so I'm taking Axel as word, but he sounds like a pretty smart guy. He says that there were 22,000 calls and they represented at 30,000 calls. And so a fairly major overinflation of the number of calls, which is obviously, something that they would do if you wanted to make sure that there was added justification to get the budget. He raised this with the fire chief. He raised this with people in the fire department. He raised this with the council. He raised it with the CFO and the internal auditor, and everyone stonewalled them and said they didn't have to follow the facts. Is that a fair conclusion, summary, Axel, of what you've told me so far?
That is correct. Yes.
Unbelievable. Why are you doing this? Why does a gentleman like you want to spend his nights going through with a fine-tooth comb and finding the difference between a 3% tax increase and an 8% tax increase and 22,000 calls versus 30,000 calls? Don't you have anything better to do in your life, sir?
Well, I'm beginning to consider it since I started in 2017, but it was accidental. I am on the board of our ratepayer group, and they asked me to go and join Muranet. And Muranet said, since you're a CPA/CA, why don't you be on the budget committee? And that's when I found out. And I should tell you, we tried to work with the city for almost 6 years and say, look, this doesn't have to be disclosed, that you used the data improperly, but correct it and allow the process then to proceed so that taxpayers have a fair chance at understanding the budget. And also just to make sure that you have your facts correct. There is much more that we discovered, but we don't have much time to discuss. This is perhaps the most important part, but it is the tip of the iceberg.
What are you doing to share this message?
Well, what I've done, actually, I'm fortunate to have a group of supporters, one of which is on air today, and they've given me advice and they use them for feedback. So we've gone initially now to my ratepayer group, and we've disclosed this information. We're also working with Muranet at the mayoralty debate, and quite frankly, we're working with CPAO. This is the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, who is the regulator of CPAs, and laid this issue at their feet. So one way or another, it's going to be made public. And by the way, I have to thank you very much, because your forum helps us immensely.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm trying to make sure that, the word gets out on a lot of issues in regards to housing and budgets and transit expenses, et cetera. I got to tell you, and maybe we can talk about this later, but I've been excluded from the mayoralty debate at Muranet, and I'm really quite disappointed that Muranet doesn't want me to attend and has not extended the invite to me and is only inviting some of the current councillors. And I think that's part of the problem. I come back to, if you had $1 billion business with almost 5,000 employees. With some of the challenges that you've talked about, I think, you might like to have an outsider, if not elected, at least take a good, strong look at it. Because I think that some of the career politicians aren't the right people to hand the reins over to in the next government. But that's a different
Well,
topic.
I should tell you that
Yeah.
two of the candidates running, one of the candidates used a legal loophole to accept funding from the union executive. And unions aren't allowed to contribute to their employers or campaigns. And the other one was endorsed by the union. So, and we have a number of other councillors who took quite sizable amounts of money in campaign donations from I'll say the union executive, none of whom live in Mississauga.
But let's, if I may interrupt for a second, I'm sorry about my voice, but let us just focus a little bit on the cost of this fire department debacle. The investment that the city had to make was $27 million, right? And also on an ongoing, that was the investment, the capital investment. Now, on an ongoing basis to staff this new expansion, how much money you were looking at again, Axel? That was about $25 million every year, something like that.
Maybe and that was based on 2019 salaries. The salaries for a firefighter are over at least $120,000 a year. And I should say, as I say, there's so much information that this show isn't long enough to preview it, but we have a handful of fire stations that have no emergencies whatsoever for a third of the year. So before you go and build new stations, the first thing one should do is take a look at relocating them.
So you're saying that they want to add 5 stations?
Seven
stations
with
a cost of $27 million, which is equal to a one-time increase of 5% of the fire budget, I presume, not of the overall budget.
Of our Mississauga taxes, not the fire budget, our Mississauga taxes. To fund $27 million is equivalent to a 5% tax increase, and then to run them annually would be a perpetual 5% increase.
And then in addition, you've got this extra 5% for operating expenses. So effectively a 10% tax increase because of just fire alone. And you're saying that the fire chief acknowledged this?
No, the fire chief acknowledged that in her 2024 budget presentation, when she asked whether her number of emergencies was correct, she said, no, this represents all of the truck movements. They track, and they should, they track every movement of every truck. But that includes going to PR, maintenance, car, washes, whatever. And so that, so their data there was overstated.
What do we got to do about this?
Well, there's a different solution, Brian. I'm sorry, Axel, maybe you can refer to these smaller vehicles, what they could use for emergencies.
Or car accidents. I'd be happy to. Yeah. For example, we approached the fire department in the United States especially, and you've seen this in Asia and Europe. They use smaller trucks, and in many of the cities in the United States are using the equivalent of, let's say, a Ford F-250, which comes fully laden with all of the equipment required by the first responder. And if you use those, you will cut the travel time substantially, and they cost a fraction of what those pumpers cost. And again, we brought that forward, and of course, we were ignored.
This is terrible. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back with some concluding comments in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We've been having a really interesting conversation with Axel Breuer and Pieter Kool, who, as I mentioned earlier, are long-term Mississauga residents. They've been involved in numerous different organizations. Peter has been very involved in the symphony and in arts and in ratepayers organizations in Mississauga. He's a Rotarian and very involved in Rotary. And Axel Breuer is a long-term CPA that got involved in his local ratepayers association, then got involved in Miranet, the Mississauga-wide ratepayer organization, and has delved into the financials of the city of Mississauga, an incredible amount of detail. And we've been talking about how when we were told that the tax increases are 3%, they're not, because they're using the wrong denominator. They're dividing by the Mississauga City and the Peel Region taxes rather than just the Mississauga taxes. And if you divide by the appropriate denominator, actually, you were getting like 7 and 8% price increases.
8.3%.
And you mentioned I'm a finance guy. I just plugged in, what 8% inflation for 10 years would be. And it's a simple calculation that people can do, 1.08 to the power of 10. You know what that is? That's a doubling.
Huge.
It's a doubling. That means that if you're paying $20,000 or $10,000 in tax, 10 years from now, you're going to be paying $20,000 or $40,000 in tax. That's unsustainable, sir.
That's correct. And Mississauga appears to have consistently raised its taxes above the rate of inflation, yet by coming out and saying, oh, it's only 3%, as in this example. And in 2024, it was a modest 2.3% when it was really 6.4%. They're creating the impression that they're doing their work responsibly. At least it's discouraging people from asking questions as to why do we have to have such high tax increases? And particularly when we have high interest rates, high housing costs, high food costs.
Do you think?
And so the city taxes, Mississauga is becoming unaffordable.
Do you think the city councilors understand the concept that you're saying, that it's not actually a modest 2.3% increase, it's actually a 7% increase?
They are very intelligent people, and I think they do. But I also feel that they are at the whim of the staff. If you don't have anybody on council who has a depth of knowledge in finance, not to say that they aren't intelligent people, but they come from different walks of life. And unless you have training and understanding how processes work and finance works, you're never going to ask the right questions. And in this case, they haven't. And sadly, though, they do know what's going on in this case. And my counselor knows because he's been actively involved. So we've got a greater issue than just not being transparent.
So what do you think the solution is, sir?
Well, there's two solutions. One is for Mississauga itself. After 6 years of working with them, we're past the point where we're able to help them and correct this problem. So we have to have the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, first of all, step in. And we have a process whereby we're hoping that they look at it and they come to the proper conclusion that you're not allowed to file false information. And then secondly, we're at the point where they refuse to hire a forensic accountant, and it won't even take a day for that accountant to demonstrate that the numbers are falsified. It's that simple. And if that is finally resolved, even though the chief has already said the 2024 number is wrong, then we may just have to file actions under the Municipal Act, because the Municipal Act says the councillors have to represent the taxpayers. But on a provincial-wide basis, there are two simple changes that can be made to the Municipal Act. The first change is that cities over a certain size must appoint an auditor general. People do not understand that an internal auditor does a very important job, but his job is predominantly to make sure that the records are kept properly and to take a look at fraud, things like that. An auditor general's job is to take a look at all the processes. That Auditor General has the right to say, do we even need to be doing this? And in doing that, that Auditor General also has the ability to look at the budgets. And then the second of the two things in the Municipal Act is to impose governance. In public corporations, the board of directors must have a board of governance made up of qualified individuals like HR, finance, legal, and they have to go through things like the financial reports and discuss processes, internal controls, and hold people to account. In municipalities, we can have a governance committee made up of the same type of people, but outsiders, neutral parties, that through whom the CFO reports, the internal auditor reports, and legal reports, and they should be able to go through and determine whether or not the documents that are being presented are reasonable, and then endorse them. They should become the audit committee. Two simple changes would pretty well guarantee transparency in the processes of the city.
I guess my difficulty with what you're saying, Axel, is that really that's the role of council.
Yes, it is.
Council should be, we elect them, we pay them to provide the oversight that you're suggesting. And if they're not doing the job and you're trying to duplicate that job by the work that you're doing, which has been excellent work, and creating another governance committee and another audit committee, aren't we effectively duplicating with capable people what council is supposed to be doing?
Yes, but unfortunately, our democratic process, and you know the very low voter turnout, in my opinion, we feel that councillors should be making sure that the snow gets shoveled, the leaves get picked up, the streets get repaired. And we forget that the primary duty of a councillor is to be a steward of the city, to make sure the city works efficiently and effectively. But a lot of our councillors don't come to that job with those skills. Again, they come from all walks of life, and I'm not denigrating them, but how many have the expertise to even understand what is being presented to them and to ask appropriate questions? That is the role of the CFO. He or she is the linchpin of this whole process. But if the CFO is the one who refuses to look if false information is published, you have no one left.
No, but I think it is up to the board, the governance, the council to ask the right questions and to demand the staff does the work. They're not there to do the work. They're the work. They're elected to be the governance structure, to provide the strategies, to staff the audit committee. It's staff's job to do
that is correct
work. And so I think what you're saying is that we're electing the wrong people without the right skill base.
Well, actually, in this case, we made a deputation and they shelved it. They could have taken the 17-page deputation, handed it to the CFO and said, refute it. Prove to us that they're wrong. They supported the CFO's position that he didn't have to look at, or that she didn't have to look at it.
I'd be very interested in reading your deputation if you could send it to me, sir.
I mentioned earlier that on February 8th, we exposed the issues with the fire department to the general counsel. And there we showed that the numbers of emergencies that they were reporting were substantially inflated. And we expressed our concerns about the response time calculation, that it was inflated, so that it was so much over standard, along with so many emergencies, that justified the building of 7 fire stations, $27 million. And of course, a huge operating cost increase. And we provide analysis with it, with maps of the city, our own calculations, other aspects. And they said thank you and shelved it, did nothing. And our conclusions on the last page is, please appoint an independent party, preferably a forensic auditor and have that person demonstrate that we are either right or that we're wrong. And they chose to do nothing.
Peter, let's pull you into this conversation if we could, sir. You've been active in Mississauga for a long period of time. What do you think the solution is?
Let's go back to your statement where you made this doubling over 10 years. And it is really, really scary. You've seen your taxes double.
Yep.
And we moved in. I moved into this house in 1970. I paid $300 a month, including mortgages and my taxes. What do we pay now? I hate to tell you. And I can't believe in 10 years from now what it's going to be. I can't afford to live here anymore.
And
right?
and yet your kids can't afford to buy your house, can't afford
Exactly.
to afford a house in Mississauga because the appreciation has been outrageous. The young people can't afford to buy. You can't afford to leave. They can't afford to buy.
And the thing what you get here with the election coming up, that they only interview existing councillors who some of them are basically in there for just keeping their job and or as a stepping stone to provincial positions. It doesn't really help us very much, and we really need, as Axel is saying, we need a proper governance system that keeps control over this. It's out of control. It is just out of control.
So I was at a debate last night, and I used the analogy of the Titanic, and I said that when you are thinking about a problem, if you just rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic, you're not going to steer clear of that iceberg. And I really worry that we're in a similar situation. If you give the current situation over to new leadership that is exactly the same as the old leadership, because it's from the same council that have created the current problems, the current situation, the current tax situation, you're going to get the same result. I think it was Einstein that said it's insanity to do the same thing and expect a different result. So I really think that there is a need to think about someone new. And there were numerous people up on stage that were not councillors that had some good qualities about them. I'd like to believe I was one of them, but several people. And I really worry, Axel, I don't know if you've read the book by the former Minister of Finance in our federal government, but it was interesting because he obviously is no longer the Minister of Finance and he's left the government. But he said that the problem is twofold: that number one, we don't have a prosperity agenda, and number two, that in the past, there's always been some business people involved in cabinet or leadership to counteract the long-term career politicians. And today, too many, if not almost all the people in cabinet and in leadership of both political parties are career politicians and haven't been out in the real world and haven't led business and private enterprise. What do you think of that?
I think that's a fair comment. I think that any good leader, in this case, if it's the Prime Minister, should, if he can't get people who go beyond politicians, then he or she should ensure that their departments are populated by people from with outside experience, real world experience, and not also career government employees. So yeah, there's a lot of truth to it. And again, I say that in the terms of city councils, I don't think you're going to find a lot of people who have the depth and breadth required to understand how businesses, and we mustn't forget, Mississauga is a big corporation. It's no different than another company. Its revenue is taxes, but it's still revenue and it has expenses. And all well-run corporations have all kinds of processes in place to constantly look for efficiency. And even though Mississauga claims it has, it clearly is not.
If we've had tax increases in that 6 to 7% to 8% range over the course of the last number of years, no one's looking for efficiencies.
Well, every year they publish a list of cost reductions, and I believe they have a cost reduction team, and I believe that they are finding savings, but the point is they're reporting, oh, we've saved 1%, equivalent of 1% tax increase in cost reduction. Okay, then why did my taxes go up 8.3%? In other words, you're spending that money on top of raising taxes. Like the staff is one of the main faults of this system, or at least in Mississauga, council has never thought to say to staff, well, for next year, we want a tax increase of only 2%. How are you going to make it happen? That's what we do in industry. We don't get the luxury of presenting, like I was CFO and executive vice president of very large corporations, and we had to say we can't afford cost increases of more than X percent. So we were tasked with the job of finding cost reductions without reduction of service. And you'll find every excuse from the city staff is, well, we'll have to cut services. And that's not true. They can change their priorities. They can time things out. They can choose not to do things. And some of those things they could do is also control their costs. They never publish their wage increases. They never publish comparisons of wages with industry. For that matter, the stormwater people don't even publish whether or not they're on time and on budget with their expenditures. And when we, for example, did a Freedom of Information request saying, give us a list of all your projects you did last year, tell us whether they were on time and on budget. They wanted to charge us $130 because they had to compile that information. What company spending $39 million doesn't have that at its fingertips? And to top it all off, their performance, what they proposed as their performance measurement, I think in 2021, was the number of Instagram followers it had, which I believe were fewer than 10. And that's what they said was their performance standards, not on time or on budget.
Peter,
So,
what do you think we need to do?
Good question. Really good question. We need some new people at council. People who are creative and people who have insight in corporate management. And how do we get that?
Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me tonight. Really appreciate it. This has been a hard-hitting, numbers-oriented, but very important conversation. And I think the fact that you, Axel, have presented the depositions that you've presented, and you have not been, you may have been heard, but you haven't been listened to, I think is one of the biggest problems that we've got, in that we have a failed democratic system municipally, where we're not electing the right people, where the citizens aren't being listened to. The turnout is so low that they only care about the people that get to the ballot box, not the entire society. And that, as you pointed out, they're fooling us in regards, or at least trying to fool us in regards to how big the tax increases are, using incorrect numbers. And it's as simple as using the wrong denominator. And I thank the two of you for the work that you're doing and the publicization of this issue. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
We're going to take a
Thank you,
break,
Brian.
and I'm going to come back with some of my own views in a concluding comment in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Breuer and Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 96. We just had a really interesting conversation with Axel Breuer and Pieter Kool, talking about some of the challenges that Mississauga has in regards to their budget. And Axel's done a really good job of effectively telling you all that you've been given inappropriate information, where they have represented that the tax increases have been, in the 3% range, but it's not the right calculation. What he's pointed out is that what they do is they take the Mississauga tax increase and they divide it by the Mississauga and Peel tax from the last year. And then they take the Peel tax increase and they similarly divide it by the Mississauga and Peel. And so they say Mississauga has a 3% tax increase, and added to it is the 4% Peel tax increase that gets you to the total tax increase. They don't tell you, which is what they should tell you, which is Mississauga divided by Mississauga and Peel divided by Peel, which is, as he's pointed out, 8%, I think it was 8.4 last year and 7% this year. And Peel even worse. And yet, you know, because Toronto is an amalgamation and we get the one number in Toronto, we hear this hue and cry about Olivia Chow recommending a 10% increase in Toronto. We're almost at that same level. There's something going wrong. If people are trying to hide the numbers from you, you know there's something wrong. And then Axel told us that he made a deposition and he analyzed in great detail the fire department budget, and he found that they were overinflating the calls. They were underinflating the response time, suggesting that they didn't respond quickly enough, and they were actually there within 10 seconds of standard. And that they were recommending 7 new stations, $25 million, 5% increase in the budget, and a 5% increase because of manpower going on thereafter. And both of them have said part of the problem is you don't have financially oriented people on council, such that even Axel's recommending we need a whole new structure, a governance structure and an audit committee, which is like duplicating council. Council is supposed to do the job. So I would suggest to you, with all humility, that what we need is new leadership. Einstein at one point in time said, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. If you elect as the mayor of Mississauga someone that was previously on the council that have created the situation that we've got, I would suggest to you that a year from now, Pieter and Axel are going to be making the same deposition, and you're going to be looking at the exact same tax increase. I think we've got a failure of our democratic system in municipal government. We only have 20% of the people that vote. The turnout is abysmal. And I think one of the reasons why it's abysmal is because people don't care. They think, oh, maybe the federal government will help, or the provincial government help. The last thing they think is the municipal government is going to help. But the municipal government is responsible for a lot of the things that impact us on a day in and day out basis. And it's property taxes that we have to pay that go to the municipal government that fund their services. We need a attitude of efficiency. We need to think about the red tape and regulations and reduce them rather than always increasing them. And you know what? I really think that this is a intergenerational inequity that is unheard of in history. Every other generation in history passes on to the next generation a better future, a better life. I think that we have given our kids, I think our kids are walking in cement. I think they've got huge amount of public debt that we are giving to them, an inaffordability of housing issue where, you know, my kids can't buy a house in Mississauga, climate change, you know, a war in Eastern Europe, a war in the Middle East, and AI that people are talking about taking all their jobs away. And all we're talking about is property taxes. There's one area that we could pay some attention to and address. Tomorrow, I'm going to have a show on housing affordability. All these other issues need to be addressed. When I was growing up, you know, we had the Cold War, nuclear holocaust. It was an issue. There's no question. I think our kids today are in a far worse situation. Think about all those issues that they're faced. And that's why mental health issues are there. That's why social isolation is there. That's why people aren't voting. They're in echo chambers. So I'd like to suggest to you that what we need more than anything else is brave, new, radical leadership that is going to take a zero-based budget review system to our municipal government, to our planning system, to almost every part of government, and think through, do we need that rule and regulation? Do we need that budget? Do we need the tax that pays for that budget? And re-justify things. And if they're not justified, cut it. There's a lot of red tape that can be cut. There's a lot of efficiency. And then the last thing that I'd mention is I do think that one of the secrets of Hazen McCallion and one of the secrets of Toronto over history is that they thought about the fact that one of the best ways to keep property taxes for residents down is have a commercial tax base. The downtown financial district, the airport corporate zone, all the industry that you bring to town, that's what keeps your property taxes down, by having a commercial tax base. And so people say, oh, well, the city's not a business. It is a business to a certain extent because we got to go out and attract those businesses. Most important reason is for great jobs for you and your kids. But beyond that, it's because that commercial tax base keeps taxes low. Toronto's taxes are half of Mississauga taxes on a market value basis. Why? Because they've done a better job of attracting business. We could do a better job of attracting business. We should run Mississauga more like a business. And to do that, you need a person with some business experience, not a person that's a career politician in power. So, my 2 cents. That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thank you for joining me. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online, even from Cooksville, at www.saga960am.ca. And my podcasts and videos are available on my website, briancrombie.com. Sobering evening, talking about doubling in taxes in 10 years. So I'm going to say good night, but maybe it's not such a good night. Thanks. Good night, everybody.